HOA ordered me to cut my messy tree. I found a nest and called the EPA. Now, they can't touch it. The first notice said I had 10 days to remove or drastically trim the messy tree obstructing the uniform aesthetic of Sun Valley Estates. Underneath, in bold, daily fines and a charming little line about the HOA arranging removal at my expense if I didn't comply, Todd, our 25-year-old board president with more gel than sense, rang my doorbell an hour later. I opened it with my purple cardigan, my mug of chamomile, and my old auditor's brain already counting the violations in his letter. He pointed past me toward my front yard. "Mrs. Vance, that tree is an eyesore. Leaves everywhere. This isn't a forest. It's Phoenix. Cut it or we will." I smiled the way grandmothers do when a toddler announces he runs the house. "Of course, Todd. Just email me the exact CC&R clause, and I'll review it." That night, instead of calling a tree service, I walked out with my iPad and started taking photos for my records. That's when George called from under the canopy, voice low, "Eleanor, I think there's a nest up here." I pushed my glasses up, zoomed in, and my stomach did a very calm, very professional little flip. They wanted me to cut a messy tree, and sitting in that branch was something a federal agency would be very interested in. If you enjoy watching arrogant HOAs overplay their hand, subscribe now, because Todd had no idea what he'd just stepped into. I didn't move to Sun Valley Estates to start a war with a 25-year-old in a slim-fit polo. When George and I bought this house 10 years ago, we were looking for quiet. He was freshly retired from the phone company. I was 2 years out of my last audit with the state, and we were both a little tired of fluorescent lights and conference rooms. Phoenix sounded like the deal. Dry heat, single-story homes, and an HOA brochure that said low-maintenance desert landscaping. Of course, my definition of low maintenance and theirs didn't quite match. They pictured gravel, 2 matching cacti, and maybe 1 approved shrub. I pictured an oasis. Over the years, George and I turned our yard into the one green square on a map of beige. Roses that won little neighborhood ribbons, a citrus tree by the side gate, succulents that actually had personality, and, yes, that big shade tree in the front yard. That tree predated us. Big, generous canopy, the kind that makes delivery drivers linger in July. The previous owner told me, "Eleanor, this tree is why I survived 3 Phoenix summers." I believed her, so I adopted it. For almost a decade, the HOA sent me polite compliments about my rose garden in their little newsletter. Best curb appeal, they called it. I have the PDF saved. No one complained about my messy tree then. Things changed when Todd moved in and somehow went from new guy with the loud Tesla to board president in under 6 months. Suddenly, Sun Valley needed to be modern. Out went the older board members who liked bake sales and block parties. In came Todd with his smartwatch and his promise to streamline operations and eliminate unnecessary maintenance costs. Translated, fewer trees, more rocks. I watched all this from my front porch, cat in my lap, tea in my hand. I'm very good at watching. 30 years as a tax auditor teach you to listen to what people think they're hiding. I saw the first victims of Todd's crusade. Mrs. Ramirez across the street told her pomegranate tree was non-compliant. The couple on the corner suddenly fined because their Palo Verde dropped debris. Every time, there was a notice with bold letters and short deadlines. Every time, Todd's little drone would buzz overhead like some robotic mosquito, documenting their violations. I started a folder on my iPad the day I saw that drone. Sun Valley HOA. Screenshots, photos, copies of emails. Not because I expected trouble, just habit. Retired doesn't mean I stopped being me. For a while, he left us alone. Maybe the award-winning roses bought us time. We walked the dog early, waved to neighbors, minded our business. George even did little side jobs, trimming hedges, checking irrigation lines. People trusted him. In our heads, we'd found peace. We almost believed we'd be allowed to keep it. Then Todd got his hands on the landscaping budget. He started talking at meetings about leaf management expenses and seasonal cleanup overruns, pacing like a startup founder instead of someone deciding the fate of Bougainvillea. I sat in the back with my knitting, listening to numbers that didn't quite line up, watching him circle back again and again to one phrase: unnecessary tree maintenance. And for a while, it seemed like my little green island might slip under his radar. Until the fall wind picked up, a few leaves landed on the sidewalk, and Todd finally turned his attention to my front yard. For a moment, even then, it still felt like it might be a simple misunderstanding, until his first gentle reminder arrived, and I saw exactly what kind of game he liked to play. The gentle reminder showed up in my mailbox like a pastel-colored threat. Friendly notice. It said at the top in a cheerful font, as if it were inviting me to brunch. Underneath, in Todd's favorite bold caps, your front yard tree is creating excessive debris and disrupting community uniformity. There was a photo printed right on the notice. My tree, circled in red like a suspect in a crime drama. At the bottom, please trim or remove within 14 days to avoid fines. George read it twice, then looked at me. Maybe I should just call Manny and have him take a little off the top. Keep the peace. I set the notice on the kitchen table, smoothed the edges. We'll keep the peace, I said, by following the rules. All of them. I went to my desk, pulled up the CC and RS on my iPad, searched tree and debris. There were guidelines, yes. Maintenance clearance over sidewalks. Nothing about disrupting uniformity. That phrase came straight out of Todd's ego, not the governing documents. So I emailed him. Dear Todd, thank you for your notice. To ensure full compliance, please provide the specific section and paragraph of the CC and RS authorizing the requested action and any applicable standards for uniformity. Once I have those, I'll review. Warm regards, Eleanor Vance. 10 minutes later, I heard the mosquito whine of the drone. Its shadow skimmed across my roses, over the dog napping on the porch, then paused above the tree like a vulture circling roadkill. I lifted my tea, watched it hover. Over my glasses, I could see Todd on his driveway across the street, phone in hand, controlling it like a video game. I held my iPad up, snapped a photo of the drone against the blue sky, then another of Todd, then the timestamp. Evidence, evidence, evidence. He must have decided he needed a more personal touch, because 15 minutes after the drone retired, my doorbell rang. I opened it to Todd, polo still tucked in like his mother dressed him, notice in hand. Mrs. Vance, he said, switching on his customer service smile. I just wanted to make sure you got our reminder. We really need everyone on the same page this season. The leaf blowers are killing our budget. Our budget, I repeated. Interesting. He frowned like he'd stepped into a pop quiz. It's a simple fix. Trim it back or, honestly, just remove it. You'll save yourself and the community a lot of hassle. Send me the clause, I said. I don't trim based on feelings. His jaw tightened. If you don't cooperate, the board can authorize removal and charge your account. I'd hate for it to get that far. The thing about young men like Todd is they think the word hate makes a threat sound compassionate. I smiled. Then we certainly wouldn't want any missteps in procedure, would we? For a second, something uncertain flickered in his eyes. Then he straightened, nodded, and walked down the path, already tapping on his phone. When I closed the door, George exhaled. You're poking the bear, Elle. I'm feeding it paper. I said, different diet. That night, we did what we always do when the world gets loud. We walked the yard. George checked irrigation lines. I checked my email. No clause from Todd. Of course. Just the original notice reattached, as if repetition made it more legal. I started a new folder in my iPad. Tree, Phase 1. Notice, email, drone photo, Todd at the door. All neatly labeled. George was up on the ladder, inspecting the higher branches, when he froze. "Elle, come here a sec." I stepped under the canopy. The air 10 degrees cooler beneath that messy shade. George pointed into the thickest part of the branches. "Right there. See it?" At first, it was just a tangle of twigs and shadows. Then my eyes adjusted. A deep, rounded bowl, woven tight, tucked into the crook of 2 limbs like it had been designed to survive a monsoon. A nest. My old auditor's brain. The part that lights up when numbers don't line up did that quiet little flip again. Because I didn't just see twigs. I saw statutes, seasons, protection windows. I raised my iPad, flipped to camera, zoomed in until the image filled the screen. The nest, a soft shape against the rough bark. "Don't touch it," I told George. "Don't even breathe on it." He looked down at me. "You think?" "I think Todd picked the wrong tree." I took a series of photos from every angle I could manage from the ground, timestamp on every one. Then I opened my notes app and typed a single line. "Potentially protected nest located. Do not disturb." At that point, I still thought this might be a small leverage point, a way to slow him down. I had no idea that tiny bundle of sticks would turn our little HOA skirmish into a full-blown regulatory nightmare for Todd. If you're already rooting for the tree, hit the like button, so this kind of HOA nonsense reaches more people who need to see it, because this was only the first test. Sun Valley is the kind of place where news travels faster than the mail truck. By the next morning, 3 people had already heard that my tree was getting removed. Mrs. Ramirez caught me at the mailbox. "Eleanor, honey, I'm so sorry. Todd did the same with my pomegranate. Said it was unsafe." She lowered her voice. "He told the board you refused to cooperate. Refused to cooperate." Neat little phrase. I walked back home, notice in one hand, phone in the other, watching the HOA email list ping. A new message from President Todd. Important community update. "Dear residents, as part of our ongoing commitment to community standards, the board is addressing several chronic landscaping issues. Some homeowners have been politely asked to correct long-standing non-compliant vegetation, which creates debris and visual inconsistency. Non-cooperation will result in fines and board-directed remediation. Thank you for your support in keeping Sun Valley beautiful." Below the text, for photos embedded. 3 were generic trees with leaves on gravel. The 4th, a perfectly framed shot of my front yard, my tree, my roses labeled in tiny text, example of excessive debris impact. He hadn't used my name, but everyone in this neighborhood knew my roses. It might as well have said, "Look at Eleanor's mess." George leaned over my shoulder. "He really sent that to everyone?" "He did," I said, saving the email as PDF, then taking a screenshot. "And he just publicly documented selective enforcement without a board vote." "English, L." I smiled. He made it very easy for me to prove he's targeting specific homeowners for his personal crusade. By afternoon, the social part of the war had begun. A couple we barely knew walked past, glanced at the tree, whispered to each other. One of Todd's buddies with the matching Tesla slowed his jog just enough to shake his head theatrically at my yard. I pretended not to notice. Instead, I sat on the porch with my tea, iPad open, and watched Todd hold court in his driveway. 3 neighbors, arms folded, listening as he drew shapes in the air with his hands. I couldn't hear every word, but budget drain, constant complaints, and some people just don't care about rules carried nicely on the dry air. Every time he gestured toward my house, one of them would glance over, then quickly look away. George shifted beside me. "They're looking at us like we kicked a puppy." "Let them," I said lightly. This is the part where he builds his narrative. I'm just taking notes. Sure enough, the next step was escalation in stationary form. 2 days after the community update, I got an official warning, second notice, even though there had never been a second inspection, never mind the clause he still hadn't provided. This one was less brunch, more courtroom. No more friendly at the top. Just, failure to comply will result in daily fines of $100 beginning in 7 days. At the bottom, a little gem. Repeated noncompliance may be grounds for legal action by the association. George hissed through his teeth. We don't need this. L. I'll call Manny tomorrow. We'll do a heavy trim, keep half the shade. We can fight the fines later if we have to. I laid the warning next to the first notice and the email printout, then opened a fresh note on my iPad. Escalation, social pressure, / threats. They're counting on you thinking that way. I told him. They isolate, they shame, they rush. It's textbook. He rubbed his face. People are already talking. Yes, I said, and I'm already archiving. The gossip kept building. A woman at the pool told me, the board's finally cracking down on the old landscaping. About time. Someone else suggested, very sweetly, that maybe a smaller tree would be easier for you at your age. Each comment went into my mental file. Culture shift, age bias, campaign of pressure. Meanwhile, Todd's drone developed a special interest in our property. It flew lower now, doing slow, nosy passes over the canopy, sometimes dipping toward the side yard where we keep the compost. The first time it buzzed close enough that I could hear the individual rotors. I simply raised my iPad, recorded a 30-second video, and labeled it Drone Harassment Pattern. Every passive-aggressive glance, every concerned, neighborly suggestion, every email with that faux professional tone. Each one was another page in the story Todd was writing about me. What he didn't realize was that I was letting him write it just so I could bind it, tab it, and eventually hand it to someone who actually mattered. Because the HOA still hadn't figured out that every whisper, every notice, every petty attempt to embarrass me in front of my neighbors was quietly sliding into a neat little folder on my iPad with one very simple label, evidence. And they hadn't even gotten to the expensive part of their mistake yet. The money talk started a week later. The official warning, second notice, barely had time to cool on my counter before a new envelope appeared, this one with a red stamp across the top. Fine assessment. Inside, a single sheet. Effective immediately, it read, you are being assessed a $100 daily fine for failure to correct your tree violation. As of this notice, your balance is $300. Additional days will be added automatically to your account. Non-payment may result in legal action or lien. $300. For leaves. On my own property. George let out a sharp breath. Okay, that's it. I'm calling Manny. We're not paying $100 a day because some kid doesn't like raking. I slid the paper out of his hand, laid it next to the first two notices, and snapped a photo. We are not paying $100 a day. I agreed. But we're also not touching that tree. I opened my laptop. Old muscles woke up in my fingers, the ones that used to type audit findings at 2 a.m. I logged into the HOA portal, pulled up our account. Sure enough, there it was. Violation 2317, landscaping, tree debris, daily fine, $100. No board vote minutes attached. No hearing record. No appeal instructions. Just a line item and a growing balance, like a parking meter controlled by a toddler. George stood behind me, hands on my shoulders. Can they do that? Not legally, I said, but they're counting on the fact that most people won't ask. I exported the ledger to PDF, highlighted the fine entries, and saved it into my Tree Phase 1 folder. Then I drafted my response. Dear Todd and Board, I acknowledge receipt of your fine assessment dated today. Please provide the following. 1. The specific CCNR and rules sections authorizing this fine. 2. A copy of the board minutes approving this enforcement action. 3. Documentation of the required hearing and my right to appeal as stipulated in Arizona HOA statute. Until this information is provided, please consider any attempt to collect or apply these fines as disputed. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance. I BCC'd myself, saved the sent email as PDF, and, old habit, printed a hard copy for a physical file. Paper may yellow, but it doesn't mysteriously disappear from the system. Todd replied in under 15 minutes. Not with the documents I requested, of course. Just, Mrs. Vance, the board has broad authority to enforce community standards. Failure to comply will not stop the fines. You are creating unnecessary work for everyone. Broad authority. My favorite phrase when someone doesn't know the limits of their power. At 7 a.m. the next morning, the escalation got literal. I woke to the sound of a truck backing up. Beep, beep, beep. And the chatter of young men who have never met sunscreen. I pulled on my cardigan, stepped outside. A landscaping crew I'd never seen before was parked in front of our house, chipper already swinging from its mount. Todd stood beside them with a clipboard, looking like a discount construction manager. "Morning, Mrs. Vance," he called, all fake cheer. "We're here to take care of that tree for you. Board approved. You'll see the charge on your next statement." George was at my side in a heartbeat. "You didn't say they were coming today." "I didn't know," I murmured, eyes on Todd, because there was no proper notice. I walked down the driveway, slow and steady, like I had all the time in the world. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said to the crew. "Before you so much as unstrap a ladder, I need to see a copy of your work order and your license number." One of the guys glanced at Todd. Todd rolled his eyes. "They don't need to show you anything, Mrs. Vance. The association contracted them. You're obstructing official maintenance." "Everything I do is very well documented," I said sweetly. I lifted my iPad, started recording. "This is an occupied nest tree. Any cutting may violate state and federal protections. If you proceed without verifying that, you may be personally liable." That got the crew's attention. "Whoa, wait," the foreman said, lowering his hand from the chipper controls. "Nest? What kind?" Someone in this equation had taken a safety course. "There is an active nest in the upper canopy," I said. "We have photographic evidence. I have already begun a consultation with environmental authorities." That last part wasn't quite true yet, but it would be within the hour. Todd scoffed. "She's bluffing. It's just a bird. Who cares? We're behind schedule. Start with the big limbs. We'll deal with her complaints later." The foreman hesitated. "Do you have that in writing from the city or state? About the nest?" He asked me. "Not yet," I said calmly, "but I'm sending the report as soon as I walk back inside. And I have video of you being informed right now." I tilted the iPad, so the screen caught his face, the truck, the tree. You could almost see the liability math run across his forehead. He turned to Todd. "Look, man, if there's a protected species or something, we're not getting fined for this. I'm not losing my license over some HOA beef. Get me something from the board attorney or the city, and we'll come back." Todd's jaw clenched. "The board will cover you. We approved it." "Cool," the foreman said, already waving his guys back to the truck. "Then the board can cut it themselves." They were gone in 5 minutes, leaving Todd on the curb with his clipboard and his ego. He spun toward me. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be." I smiled pleasantly. "On the contrary, Todd, you just tried to perform non-emergency work on a tree with a potentially protected nest without proper notice, hearing, or documentation. You're making it very easy." I walked back inside, heart steady, put the kettle on, and opened a new folder on my iPad. Tree, Phase 2, Regulatory. Because that was the moment I understood he wasn't going to stop. And if I didn't escalate beyond our little beige kingdom, he'd do this to every old tree, every non-modern yard in Sun Valley. They'd moved from gossip to money, and from words to trucks. The next step would be forcing the issue, no matter what laws they scraped against along the way. It was time to stop reacting and start aiming. And to do that, I needed help from someone who spoke environmental statute even better than I did. Drop a comment if you've ever had a HOA jump straight to fines and bulldozers, because standing there watching that truck back away, I knew this was only going to get uglier before it got better. The kettle clicked off while I was still watching Todd fume on the sidewalk. George paced the kitchen. We just scared off his crew with a bluff. What if he calls our bluff tomorrow? I poured hot water over my tea bag. Then we make sure it isn't a bluff. Because here's the thing Todd never understood. I don't yell. I don't slam doors. I don't post rants on Facebook. I open folders. I took my iPad to the dining table, the same spot where I used to spread out tax returns and audit reports, and tapped Laura's name. She picked up on the second ring, hair in a messy bun, fluorescent office lights behind her. Hey, Mom, everything okay? Define, okay? I said, hypothetical for you. Say a cranky old lady has a big shade tree with an active nest. Her HOA is trying to cut it down to save on leaf blowers. What's the smartest way for this purely hypothetical woman to proceed? Laura's eyes narrowed the way mine used to across a conference table. What kind of nest? High up, well-built, bigger than a dove's. I said, George thinks maybe a hawk or an owl. In Phoenix. She leaned closer to the camera. You have photos? I was already airdropping them. Multiple angles. Time-stamped. And video of the HOA's contractor being told there's a nest and backing off. Laura swiped through in silence, her engineer brain doing its calculus. Okay, first, do not touch the tree. Don't trim, don't move branches, nothing. Second, you're not calling the HOA again. You're going above them. EPA? I asked. Eventually, she said, but step one is local wildlife or state game and fish. In Arizona, raptors and most migratory birds are protected under federal law. If that's a hawk or owl, your messy tree just became very interesting to several agencies. There was a tiny beat of pride in her voice. My girl, talking statutes instead of science fair projects. I smiled. And how would a cranky old lady get their attention without sounding like a crank? Laura grinned. By filing a factual, boring report. Photos, dates, description, and a note that a third party attempted non-emergency removal. No drama, just data. Bureaucracies love data. Runs in the family, I said. While she talked, I opened a fresh note, regulatory contacts. She dictated the hotline and online portal for state wildlife, the exact language to use, suspected raptor nest, potential disturbance by HOA contractor, request for site review. And Mom, she added, once that report is in, timestamp a copy and save the submission confirmation. If this goes anywhere, chain of custody on your evidence matters. I almost laughed. Sweetheart, I was printing email headers before you were walking. I've got chain of custody covered. Right, she said, smirking. Forgot who I was talking to. One more thing. Don't tell him what agency you called. Let him underestimate it. If an inspector shows up, I want him surprised. I ended the call, heart calmer than it had been in days. I wasn't just an old woman with a tree anymore. I was an old auditor with a tree and a direct line to someone who spoke fluent environmental regulation. Report filed, confirmation saved, screenshots labeled. I took a breath and opened a different kind of document, the Sun Valley Estates governing documents, an annual budget. If Todd was willing to break process on fines and push a legal tree removal, odds were good his modernization campaign wasn't just about aesthetics. Men like him rarely wage war on leaves without a financial motive lurking in the mulch. Page by page, I went through the landscaping line items, vendor payments, special projects he'd boasted about in his emails. My finger traced increases, my brain running quiet comparisons. 40% jump in tree removal services over 6 months. New vendor with APO box and a name suspiciously similar to Todd's gym buddy. Drone monitoring listed under security upgrades with no competitive bids. I felt that old, familiar click in my chest, the one that always came right before I wrote up a finding. Todd thought this was about one messy tree. He thought his broad authority and shiny gadgets made him untouchable. What he didn't know was that I now had 2 weapons he couldn't see, a daughter who lived and breathed environmental statutes, and 30 years of experience turning sloppy paperwork into consequences. From that moment, I stopped treating this like a neighborhood spat and started treating it like what it really was, an audit with a very arrogant subject. And while the nest waited quietly in my branches, I began quietly building the case that would make sure no one in Sun Valley could ever casually threaten a tree or a neighbor the way Todd had again. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, because for the first time, this wasn't just me versus Todd. It was Todd versus process. And process is where I live. In the morning, I made coffee, sat at the dining table, and opened 3 things: the wildlife agency portal, the HOA documents, and a fresh yellow legal pad. Old habits. First, I cleaned up my evidence. Every photo of the nest got its own label. Angle, time, date. I added screenshots of the fine ledger, Todd's community update, email with my yard as Exhibit A, and the video of the landscaping crew backing away after I warned them about the nest. Each file went into a folder with a calm, boring name, 2024-03, tree. Bureaucracy's trust boring. Then I filed my wildlife report like Laura told me. No adjectives, just facts. Suspected raptor, nest located in mature shade tree in front yard of Sun Valley Estates residents. HOA has issued removal order and attempted to send contractor for non-emergency work. Contractor was informed of nest and left. Photos and video attached. Requesting site review and guidance. Upload, attach, submit. A neat little thank you for your report, case hashtag, popped up, screenshot, saved, printed, clipped to the front of a manila folder on my credenza. Next, the HOA side. I drafted a formal request for internal hearing and records, citing the exact Arizona statute number Laura had texted me the night before. I asked for board minutes, vendor contracts, and any written policy on tree removal. I didn't send it yet. Timing matters. Instead, I sent something much simpler to Todd. Per Arizona statute, all enforcement actions are hereby formally disputed pending a hearing. Any further attempt to alter the tree may interfere with an ongoing investigation by state wildlife authorities. I hit send and, for good measure, slid my phone onto the porch railing and hit record because I knew that email would make him do something stupid. Right on cue, the drone appeared 10 minutes later. This time it flew so low over the canopy I could see the tiny camera gimbal pivot searching for the nest. It hovered over our driveway, then our side yard, then backed up to get a full shot of the tree. I just sat there, cardiganed and unbothered, sipping my coffee while my phone captured the whole intrusion. George stepped out. He's practically in the living room. Let him, I murmured. He's documenting my protected tree for me. I waited until the drone buzzed off, then took screenshots from the video. Its distance from our windows, its path over our property line. Another label, pattern of surveillance, retaliation after dispute. The next 48 hours were quiet on the surface. Underneath, I was busy. I walked the neighborhood with George under the guise of checking irrigation heads, and listened. Mrs. Ramirez mentioned Todd had threatened to lean her house over fruit debris. The corner couple showed me their own stack of pink and red notices. With their permission, I photographed everything, dates, amounts, lack of hearing notices. Each went into subfolders, other victims' documentation. I wasn't just building my case anymore. I was sketching a pattern of abuse. Back home, I opened the HOA budget again, this time with a highlighter. Every line that said tree removal or landscaping emergency got a mark. Then I cross-referenced dates with neighbor stories. Mrs. Ramirez's pomegranate, the Palo Verde on the corner, the big mesquite 2 streets over. The same vendor name popped up every time. I looked it up. No website, just a phone number and a P.O. box. But the business filing with the state, registered agent with the same last name as Todd's gym buddy, the one who was always at his driveway meetings. Well, I said to the cat, hello, conflict of interest. I printed the corporate record, highlighted the names, added it to the folder. By day 3, my little war room was complete. Physical file on the credenza, digital file on the iPad, backups in the cloud. Every notice, every drone flyover, every casual threat, sewn together into a tidy narrative with dates and statute numbers. All I needed now was one more piece, proof that Todd would keep pushing even after being told there was a state case open. Something no reasonable board president would do. So I gave him the opportunity. I sent one more email, perfectly polite. Todd, until state wildlife has concluded their review, I will not authorize any work on the tree. I trust the board will refrain from further attempts to access my property in the meantime. Then I waited. Because when a man like Todd is told no by a woman he's already decided is a problem, he almost never stops. He overreaches. And I needed that overreach on paper, and preferably on camera. If you've followed me this far, make sure you're subscribed, because the way he took that bait and marched himself straight into the perfect trap still makes me shake my head. 2 days after I sent that last polite "do not touch my tree" email, the bait finally took. It started with a reply from Todd at 6:14 a.m. Mrs. Vance, your continued refusal to comply is creating unnecessary drama. The board has determined that your tree is not special, protected, or exempt. As such, we will be proceeding with removal this week. You do not have authority to freeze enforcement. Consider this your final notice. Todd, HOA president. Not special. I had to admire the confidence. I forwarded his email to Laura with one line, "He bit." Her response came back almost immediately. "Good. Do not respond. Let him act. If wildlife calls, text me." Wildlife called that afternoon. A calm woman named Denise left a voicemail. They'd reviewed my report and photos, and given the nest size and shape, they were highly interested. She asked if they could send a biologist to inspect within the week, and reminded me not to disturb the tree. I saved the voicemail audio, transcribed it, and slid both into my folder. Then I did something very important. I didn't tell Todd a word. Instead, I printed his not special email and paperclipped it right on top of Denise's message. Present meet future. The next day, Todd's drone returned with reinforcements. This time, he didn't just hover over my yard. 2 other little buzzing wasps joined in, zigzagging across the street, up and down the block, pausing over every front yard tree like we were all suspects in some leaf-based crime ring. I could see Todd on his driveway with 2 of his buddies, each with a controller, laughing. "Leaf sweep," George muttered. "Like a police raid, but for shade." I set my phone on video again. 3 drones, our address, his voice carrying, "That one's coming down, that one's next, that one's a fine." They lingered over our tree longer than any other. One dropped low enough that the branches stirred. "Careful," one friend called. "You'll hit the nest." Nest. On camera. I zoomed in and silently thanked the universe for young men who narrate their own mistakes. That evening, as the sun turned the stucco gold, a new email hit the neighborhood list. Emergency landscaping meeting. This Thursday, mandatory for owners affected by tree violations. Embedded, of course, were before and after photos of yards he'd already fixed and a fresh shot of my tree from the drone, circled in red. Items to be discussed. Chronic offenders. Cost of debris cleanup. Board-authorized removals. Attendance strongly encouraged. Chronic offender. I almost laughed. George looked worried. "You're going to that?" "Oh, I wouldn't miss it," I said, "and neither will a few other people." The next morning, I printed 20 copies of my wildlife case confirmation, with my address blacked out, but the phrase "suspected raptor nest, investigation pending" very visible. I tucked them into a plain manila folder labeled "for meeting." Then I called Mrs. Ramirez and the corner couple. "Just so you know," I told them, "there's an open wildlife case involving my tree. If Todd is planning mass removals, it might be useful for him to say that out loud in front of as many witnesses as possible." By Thursday, word had spread the way it always does in places like Sun Valley, quietly between casseroles and mailbox runs. People who'd rolled their eyes at tree drama were suddenly curious. Todd thought he'd organized a show of strength, him at the front of the room, projector on, everyone nodding along while he justified tearing out anything that dared cast a shadow. What he'd actually done was schedule, advertise, and record the perfect stage for him to dismiss a pending state investigation, brag about ignoring due process, and outline his little side hustle in front of half the neighborhood. All I had to do was show up with my cardigan, my iPad, my neat little folder, and let him talk. When that emergency meeting started, I knew 2 things he didn't. There was already a case number on my tree, and someone from the state was very interested in how this HOA treated raptor nests. And when they got to the agenda item labeled chronic offenders, I was ready to let him step right off the cliff he'd been building, because they'd marked the time, sent the invitations, and turned on the projector themselves. All I'd done was give them the rope. The emergency landscaping meeting looked exactly like every pointless corporate briefing I'd ever sat through. Same beige walls, same stack of stale cookies, same PowerPoint screen glowing at the front. Todd stood beside it in his tight polo, laser pointer in one hand, HOA logo projected behind him like a halo. I took a seat in the second row with my purple cardigan, my iPad, and my neat little manila folder. George sat beside me, arms crossed. Mrs. Ramirez slipped into the back, gave me a quick nod. Todd cleared his throat into the cheap microphone. Thanks for coming on such short notice, everyone. We're here to talk about chronic tree problems and how they're costing all of us money. Click. First slide, leaf management costs, up 40%. A bar chart he'd clearly made that morning. He paced. Some homeowners, he let that hang, are not maintaining their trees. Debris everywhere. Sidewalk hazards. It's not fair to the rest of you who follow the rules. Next slide, 4 photos. 3 generic before and after removals. Then my yard, front and center, circled in red. This, he said, tapping my tree, is a perfect example of a non-compliant, messy tree. The board has already issued multiple notices and begun fines, but the owner refuses to cooperate. So, we're stepping up enforcement. Deadlines. Removals. No more excuses. A murmur moved through the room. A few people glanced at me, then quickly away. Todd smiled like a man about to drop the hammer. So he continued, for any chronic offenders who think they can hide behind loopholes or fake issues to stall, he actually rolled his eyes. Let me be clear. The board has determined these trees are not protected, not special, and we will remove them with or without consent if necessary. Questions? I raised my hand. He visibly fought the urge to sigh. Yes, Mrs. Vance. I stood slowly, folder in one hand, iPad in the other. Todd, just so I'm clear, did you say the board has determined my tree is not protected? That's right, he said, leaning on the podium. We're not letting one messy tree derail community standards. And you're willing to remove it, I asked, even knowing there's an active nest in the canopy? He smirked. People put up fake nests all the time. We're not falling for that. The room rustled. Someone whispered, fake nest. I tapped my iPad. The screen lit up with a crisp photo of the nest, projected behind him. High, deep, solid. A couple of quiet gasps. Interesting, I said, because 3 days ago, I filed a report with Arizona Game and Fish about that fake nest. They opened case number 24173B for a suspected raptor nest under federal protection. Would you like to see the confirmation? I walked up and laid a printed copy of the state email on the table in front of him. He glanced down, went a little pale, then tried to recover. Anyone can file a report, he said loudly. That doesn't mean anything. We can't let paranoid people freeze legitimate board business. Behind him, my next slide appeared. A screenshot of Denise's voicemail transcription. Please do not disturb the tree until our biologist has inspected the site. I read aloud. That's from the state, dated yesterday. So when you say the board has decided the tree is not protected, are you saying the board overrules state wildlife law now? A man in the third row raised his hand. Todd, can we get in trouble for that? Todd's jaw worked. We're just enforcing aesthetics. We're not biologists. The board has broad authority. Within the law, I cut in gently. And there's another issue. I turned my iPad to a different photo. The landscaping truck in front of my house, chipper ready, Todd with his clipboard. This was taken the morning you tried to have my tree cut down without proper notice or a hearing. On video, you're informed there's a nest. The contractor refuses to proceed without clearance. Yet 2 days later, I tapped again, showing his 6:14 a.m. email. You emailed me saying the tree is not special, protected, or exempt, and that you'd remove it anyway. That's bold. Someone in the back snorted. The sound broke the room's spell. Mrs. Ramirez spoke up. He told me my pomegranate was unsafe and fined me $200 when I asked for the rule in writing. The corner neighbor added, we got the same fines over debris and never got a hearing either. I nodded toward them. Funny you mentioned that. I pulled out a stapled packet from my folder. I requested the HOA's vendor payments for tree removals. I held up the highlighted page. Under Todd's term, our leaf management costs jumped 40%, all to one new vendor, Desert Vista Arbor Care. Registered agent? I flipped the page. Evan Ross, also known as the gentleman who spots Todd at the gym every morning and stands in his driveway most afternoons. All eyes swung back to Todd. That's confidential financial information. He sputtered. You can't just. Arizona law says owners have the right to inspect association records. I replied calmly. I filed a written request. You approved it. Remember? I lifted his terse, per statute, records available email. Paper trail goes both ways. From the side of the room, a new voice cut through the noise. Excuse me, is this the Sun Valley Emergency Landscaping meeting? Every head turned. A woman in khakis and a state logo polo stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, ID badge visible. Behind her, another figure I knew very well, ponytail, button down, that familiar thinking frown. Laura. She caught my eye, gave the tiniest nod, then addressed the room. I'm Denise with Arizona Game and Fish. We're here regarding a reported raptor nest and attempted disturbance by a homeowners association contractor. Todd actually took a step back. You called the state. I smiled pleasantly. I did. 3 days ago. That's Denise. And that, I gestured to my daughter, who was now flashing her own badge, is Laura. She happens to be an environmental engineer with the state. She's been advising me on the proper procedures. Todd's mouth opened and closed. You work for the state, he said to her, voice cracking. Laura's tone was cool, professional, the exact tone I used to reserve for sloppy CFOs. I don't work for this department, she said, but I'm very familiar with the regulations they enforce. And everything my mother described in her report raised red flags. Denise stepped past him to the front, glancing at my projected nest photo. Just to be clear for everyone here, she said, addressing the room, if this is an active raptor nest, disturbing it, cutting branches, harassing the birds, or attempting removal can be a violation of federal law. Fines can be substantial. They often start in the thousands. A hush fell. Denise turned to Todd. We'll be inspecting the site today. In the meantime, any further attempt by this association to alter that tree could expose the board and the vendor to liability. Were you aware of this when you scheduled removal? Todd's face had gone the color of uncooked dough. I didn't think it was that serious. I thought she was exaggerating. On the contrary, I said softly, I tend to understate. Denise jotted something down. We'll also need copies of any notices, fines, and board minutes related to tree removals under your term. And the contract with Desert Vista Arbor Care. Half the room turned to watch him sag slightly against the podium. Exposing the HOA in public was satisfying, I won't lie. Watching Todd realize in front of his audience that his messy tree problem had just become a regulatory and financial nightmare, that was just the beginning. Because humiliating him in that room was one thing. What came next hit where people like him feel it most, in their wallets and in their precious sense of control. If you've ever wanted to tell a power-tripping HOA exactly where they can stick their fines, tell me in the comments what you'd have said to Todd at that microphone, because the real punishment was still on its way. Denise didn't waste time. The meeting broke like a school assembly after a fire drill. People clustered in nervous knots, whispering about federal law and thousands in fines. Todd tried to slip out the side door, but Denise called after him, "Come as you please. Mr. President, you'll want to be present for the inspection, liability, and all that." So the whole procession trooped down the street. Denise, her colleague, Laura, me, and George, half the room trailing behind like it was the neighborhood parade. Todd stalked ahead, jaw tight, trying to look in charge. Under the tree, Denise tilted her head back, raised binoculars, and was quiet for a long, satisfying minute. Then she said the word I'd been waiting for. Raptor. George let out a low whistle. Denise pointed. You've got a hawk nesting up there. Active. I can see fresh material. And, yep, There's one on the rim right now. She lowered the binoculars and turned to Todd. This tree is now under protection. Any non-emergency trimming or removal is off the table until the nest is inactive. You touch it, you're looking at state and federal consequences. Todd's face went slack. So, how long? Breeding season, she said. Plan on months. Maybe longer if they reuse the site. We'll send a written order. She looked at me. Ma'am, we'll also note in our file that you notified both the contractor and the HOA before they attempted work. That helps. Helps. Such a small word for you're covered, he's cooked. Back inside, I made tea while Laura and Denise finished their paperwork. Todd sat in a corner of the clubhouse, staring at his phone like it might sprout wings and fly him out of this. Denise handed him a form. Written directive. No disturbance of that tree or nest. Also, we'll need those records we mentioned. Tree removals, fines, board minutes. We can subpoena if needed, but cooperation is always better. He nodded, Adam's apple bobbing. We'll cooperate. I could have stopped there. Tree safe, fines obviously tainted, Todd sufficiently chastened. But then Denise added, almost casually, we've been seeing more of this lately, boards using cleanup as an excuse to bulldoze habitat. We take patterns seriously. She glanced at my folder. Looks like you've seen a pattern too. That was my cue. The next morning, my request for internal hearing and records went out certified mail to the full board and the management company. Attachment list running 2 pages. All notices, fine ledgers, vendor contracts, removal authorizations, and Todd's greatest hits emails. At the same time, I drafted a different packet, calmer, cooler. I sent it to the state HOA ombudsman, and, at Laura's gentle suggestion, copied the Attorney General's Consumer Division. Summary of concerns. It began. Pattern of improper fines, failure to provide hearings, conflict of interest in landscaping contracts, and potential retaliation related to protected wildlife report. Behind that, timelines, screenshots, vendor filings, Denise's directive, and 3 neighbor statements I'd collected. Then I waited. The first domino fell at the next board meeting. Attendance was standing room only. People who'd never shown up for anything, but the holiday potluck were packed in, clutching copies of Denise's letter and their own pink and red notices. The property manager cleared his throat. As you've all seen, we've received a directive from Arizona Game and Fish regarding the Vance property. All enforcement related to that tree is suspended. Fines will be reversed pending legal review. Murmurs. A couple of people actually clapped. And he continued, voice tighter. The board has also been notified of an open investigation by the state ombudsman into our fine practices and landscaping contracts. To avoid any appearance of impropriety, President Todd has voluntarily stepped back from enforcement decisions until that review is complete. Every head turned to Todd. He tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. Voluntarily. Sure. Behind him, 2 board members looked like they'd aged 5 years. One finally spoke. We were not aware of the extent of the tree removal spending or the relationship with the vendor. We'll be appointing an independent CPA to review the books. That independent CPA turned out to be a gray-haired woman from my old department who recognized me the second she walked in. Didn't expect to see you on this side of the table, she murmured. Retired. Not dead. I murmured back. Over the next month, the consequences stacked up in neat little piles. All tree-related fines in the community, frozen, then refunded where they'd already been paid. Desert Vista Arbor Care's contract terminated pending investigation. Their last invoice, including the attempted hit on my tree, flagged for review. Todd's dream of a rock and drone utopia paused indefinitely. The CPA's preliminary report, read aloud in a very tense special meeting, pointed to irregular approval processes, insufficient documentation for vendor selection, and potential self-dealing. 3 phrases that keep attorneys up at night. Within a week, Todd resigned as president for personal reasons. 2 other board members quietly followed. The management company, suddenly eager to be on the right side of this, proposed a brand new enforcement policy. Written hearings, clear appeal rights, no fines without board vote and statute citations. They even added a clause about consulting with environmental authorities before any major landscape changes. My favorite line? Buried on page 3. Drone surveillance shall not be used for routine compliance inspections. As for my so-called messy tree, it got a laminated sign at its base, courtesy of Denise's office, explaining that a protected raptor family lived there and asking residents to enjoy from a distance. Neighbors started bringing their grandkids by to look for the hawk. Same folks who'd whispered about my debris now waved from the sidewalk, asking, "Seen her today?" From my porch, tea in hand, I watched the very same drones that once buzzed menacingly over my roses disappear from the neighborhood skies. Sun Valley wasn't the same after that. The fear was gone. The board remembered they worked for the owners, not the other way around. And Todd learned that broad authority shrivels up fast under real scrutiny. Hit the like button if you think more HOAs need to learn that lesson the hard way, because even with the tree protected and the fines reversed, there was still one thing about this whole mess that kept nagging at me. In the end, the thing that bothered me most wasn't the fines or the gossip. It was the idea that someone could look at a living, breathing piece of shade and call it messy just because it didn't match their spreadsheet. So yes, it was deeply satisfying when Denise's laminated sign went into the ground under my messy tree. Protected raptor nesting site. Do not disturb. Todd used to brag about how his drones kept the community in line. Now those same drones avoided my yard like it was radioactive. Kids walked past with their grandparents, pointing up at the hawk. Neighbors who'd once whispered about my leaves now brought over coffee and said things like, "You really showed them, Eleanor." I always answered the same way. I didn't show them anything. The rules did. The audit the board commissioned dug deeper than even I expected. Desert Vista's cozy arrangement flagged as potential self-dealing. Fines without hearings? Labeled non-compliant with Arizona statute. Retroactive emergency authorizations for removals that had clearly been planned weeks in advance. My old colleagues circled those in red. The state ombudsman's office sent their own letter full of polite but deadly phrases: corrective action, binding policy revision, mandatory training. The management company, suddenly eager to cooperate, rolled out workshops on due process, open records, and conflict of interest disclosure. I went to the first one and sat in the back, knitting. Todd didn't attend. He'd already moved 2 streets over to a rental while he sorted things out, according to the rumor mill. His house went on the market a month later, listed as cozy, low-maintenance property in quiet, tree-friendly community. Tree-friendly. I printed the listing just to amuse myself. Sun Valley changed in small but important ways. The new board president is a retired school principal who actually reads things before signing them. Fines now come with citations, hearing dates, and appeal instructions. The drones? Officially banned for compliance checks. If someone has a concern, they knock on a door like a human being. Neighbors who used to shrug and say, "That's just the HOA," started showing up to meetings, asking to see budgets, questioning line items. Mrs. Ramirez joined the landscaping committee. George became the unofficial tree guy, walking around with his pruning saw and a stack of printouts Denise gave him about proper trimming seasons. As for me, I went back to my routine. Tea on the porch, cat in my lap, dog at my feet, iPad nearby. I still keep a folder named Sun Valley HOA because old habits die hard. But these days it fills up slower, and mostly with minutes and policies that make sense. Sometimes people ask if I'm proud that we beat the HOA. I always correct them. We didn't beat the HOA. I say, we reminded it who it belongs to. And we taught one very confident young man that technology and titles don't outrank the law. Every so often, when the evening light hits just right, I'll see the hawk launch from that high branch and circle over the neighborhood. She doesn't know she's protected by statutes and case numbers. She just knows the air is hers. And I sit there, cardigan and chamomile, feeling that small, precise satisfaction I used to feel when a messy set of books finally balanced. In that neighborhood, the war with the HOA was over. But for those who know the system from the inside, they know there's always another committee president somewhere who thinks they're above the law. subscribe to the channel, and watch the absurd story that occurred at another HOA. Click on the video that's currently appearing on your screen.